turned to try to follow this bright object that they could see. You know, at that distance they couldn't see the ground units, but they saw the object. And they said, and what was odd was the jets would go around it and then come back and then go around it and then come back several times as it was going along, but they didn't seem to shoot at it, and they certainly didn't stay behind it to follow it. They really didn't understand why, but this was what they reported. Also then here, there was also a deputy from Columbiana County Sheriff's Department who, from a different vantage point, saw the same thing, reported seeing the jets, and asked if he should join the chase, was told that's okay. They reported that the object, that the officers themselves who were pursuing had heard from the dispatcher in Conway that he had contacted the Pittsburgh airport, who had contacted the Youngstown Air Base, and they're the ones who scrambled the jets. This was done, verified on their radios. Later, this was completely denied by the Air Force. Of course, they said they didn't send anything up. During this chase, by strange behaviors, the object gained and lost altitude, sped up, slowed down, went right, went left. At one occasion, it was getting very far ahead of them. They went under a series of railroad bridges in Pennsylvania. They said it was about 2 miles ahead of them. They came out from the other side of those railroad bridges about 15 seconds later, and it was right over them. So I don't know, if something covers 2 miles, and that's pretty fast, and that kind of spooked them. They said they all locked up their brakes, almost caused an accident because you come out and there it was, and then the thing just took off again, and they continued to follow this. Now, if you're familiar with this case, you've never heard of any of this, of course, because somehow this didn't make it into the published material. So anyways, they get to Conway, Pennsylvania. They said at that point the object was probably about 1,000 feet in the air, and it was looking smaller and smaller. They saw some other jets that were passenger line jets from the Pittsburgh airport fly by it, and then they said that all of a sudden this object went from about 1,000-foot altitude to out of sight completely, and in all the officers' testimony, in about 2 seconds. So I guess it decided to leave. Now later, when I tell you that the Air Force says this was Venus, I think that's a very odd behavior for Venus to do. When I look at Venus, it stays right there. These guys seem like nice guys. I didn't see any reason for it to run, but well, anyway. So Project Bluebook, which again I didn't know anything about. It's like NICAP to me. I heard Project Bluebook. Okay, is that like a theatrical play? I mean, I had no idea what this was. I was told, oh no, it was this very serious Air Force investigation group. Anyways, on May 10th, Hector Quintanilla, who was I guess retired lieutenant colonel or colonel, but in the papers I had was a major, drove up from Dayton to Ravenna, Ohio, and interviewed all the witnesses on May 10th. And I've got actually I have the actual tape recordings, which Wendy Connors from Faded Discs has some of those taped interviews, the ones I'm referring to now. So if you contact Wendy Connors, I think she's got a website. You can go on there. It's a wonderful lady, wonderful project. She's got that entire interview on a disc you can order, and basically tells them, yeah, you were chasing Venus. And if you listen to that, it's really odd. They're saying, does Venus normally go left and right and like look 50 feet wide, up as big as a house, and hover over your car? And he goes, no, but you were chasing Venus. Which now I understand. I hadn't come here, so I mean, I thought that how could they do that? I'm starting to get the clue light as to how that might happen. I'm going to briefly go over what I consider the different evidence, what I'm emphasizing here, and then I'm going to get to the meat of what I'm going to say. The facts in the UFO case that I found, the actual Sheriff's Department case file, is obviously quite different than the published reports in the NICAP report and what's in a lot of files. In fact, as I said, most of the files that you'll read will state that there were those 2 police officers and maybe 1 or 2 others. When the whole thing's examined and you look at all the witnesses, we have a total of 9 police officers who witnessed and chased this, 3 civilians who witnessed it at close range and or were physically affected by the object, and hundreds of eyewitnesses who watched this. Now again, please bear with my naivety. One of the things I found when I was looking at the newspaper articles on this chase was a reference to an earlier chase that happened about 5 months, or not chase, I guess it was case. I'm not sure what it was. But the Pittsburgh Gazette, if you look up April 18th of 1966 on their website, the Pittsburgh Gazette has this big thing saying the number of people who witnessed this case dwarfed that from the Kecksburg case. I don't know what a Kecksburg case was, but I've been educated by some members here asking. I guess Kecksburg was another one of those UFO cases. But when that happened in December, I guess a lot of people reported seeing a fireball. The Pittsburgh Gazette said this pursuit people, vastly larger numbers of people actually witnessed this object in April of 1966. I don't have the time to go over all the interviews here. I'm going to touch on some highlights, but I did do some interviews that we'll get to. One civilian did suffer physical effects from the exposure to the cone of light. The Youngstown Air Force Map Station commander confirmed, and this is in the book, and this is a document that's available to any serious researcher who wants to contact me, signed a voluntary statement to a law enforcement officer sworn under oath that, yes, he indeed scrambled two F-102 interceptor jets from Youngstown Air Base, that the problems they ran into was, A, the object wasn't painting on their radar screen. They couldn't acquire the target, although the pilots acknowledged they visually could see it quite plainly. And two, that its airspeed was so slow that they couldn't maintain a distance behind it. In technical terms, aircraft have to maintain a certain speed to stay in the air or they fall. And this object was going slower than those jet aircrafts could fly, which explains why those other officers saw them just circling them as they went along, couldn't figure out why they just didn't get behind them. Well, the reason is because this object was moving too slowly. The jets couldn't fly that slow to stay behind them. Because they couldn't paint anything on their radar. And if you know anything about mid-1960s technology, the missiles were radar guided for the most part. They had no way to acquire the target. Therefore, they decided, well, we can't do anything about it. So they went back to the air base. They basically went home. Gee, it's really weird, and we're going home. Suffice it to say that all of them described the object in a similar manner. The reports from the Youngstown Air Base commander, which is hearsay because he wasn't in the jet, but what he said his pilots saw matched the description of what the 9 law enforcement officers who were interviewed did it. It was seen from various angles and distances. It made very rapid movements while they were following it. They noted, in fact, some of the officers noted that it was moving, and some of them were amateur astronomers, notably Officer Panzanella. And when he was describing its movement, at one point he even said, well, and when it made its move from this side of the road to this side of the road, it covered Venus and the moon as it was moving, which is how he was identifying its angle in the sky on his report, which seems awfully odd how Venus can cover Venus. But I'm not an Air Force officer, so I don't know. Anyway, so that seems to contradict that theory that it was Venus anyways. I do want to relate a short excerpt. This slide presentation, like I said, it was set up to be a little different. From the book, as the object approached that restaurant in Deerfield that I had alluded to a little bit earlier, the night cook and the waitress were outside taking their a morning break. They didn't have a lot of customers. And her name was Betty Raymond. And I interviewed her, and she's actually still alive. The night cook's first name was Chuck. He's no longer with us, and I haven't gotten permission to release a last name, but by the time the book comes out, it'll all be in there. They saw the object approaching, and Betty had noted that she got pretty excited about this because, as she described it, it was huge. As it got closer, she saw the angular size of it. And what I mean by that, it wasn't a point of light. As this thing got bigger, she saw an object that was pretty big and very bright. So she started getting a little bit nervous. She decided she was going to jump behind her car and wait until this thing just went away. She ended up being the smart one. She jumped behind the car and doesn't remember seeing anything else. Chuck, however, decided, I guess maybe being a guy, well, I'm going to stand here and watch this thing. So he watched the thing pass over and noted that right when it got overhead and he was in that cone of light, his skin felt hot. It felt like there was an electric field, like his hair was standing up. And he noticed that his skin really started stinging quite badly to the point where he eventually decided he's going back inside. But he also noted that the deputies and one other car at this point came a few seconds after the object had passed, chasing him through the circle, and were on their way. He guessed the object to be about 70-foot diameter as well. So that's a good fit with the previous statements. After the object passed and they went inside, he kept saying, boy, his skin really hurt, and Betty took a look at him, and evidently this gentleman was wearing a short-sleeved shirt in April, but said that his arms, his face, his eyebrows, his nose, his neck were all just beet red as if it were sunburn, and remained so for about 2 weeks after this thing. And, of course, obviously he didn't have that before they went outside. So whatever that light was, and I'm not going to speculate on what it was, but it did something to this gentleman's skin that resulted in an injury that very similar to sunburn. So they also noticed later that morning when she was getting ready to leave, her car wouldn't start. They popped her hood, and her entire ignition coil and wires were just fried, just literally smoked. She said melted. And obviously she drove there. The car was running fine. Now, can we say that this object caused that? Well, I suppose something could have shorted between when she parked it in the morning. As a scientist, I have to say that's possibly true. Seems awfully odd, though, that he gets a sunburn and her wires get burned out at the same time. Notably, within the hour, actually, when you check the time on what Betty recollects the time to be with the official police report, before this chase had even terminated in Pennsylvania, a car pulled in there with two gentlemen got out wearing what she described as business suits, said they were with the Air Force and wanted to know what they had seen. Literally 30 minutes after this had passed.